So welcome to the next episode of the Existential Files. We're joined again by Taner, is it Edis? Edis? How do you pronounce your surname? Edis. And in the previous one, we talked about the really big questions of the nature of the universe, and I was asking my naive questions about, well, why does it go to existing in the first place? And I think you've given some really useful thoughts there to think about. We're going to just pick up on something else that we know about some of your current work. You currently deliver a course called Weird Science. And I'm noting that somebody who Louie and I know both know very well is actually Louie's PhD supervisor, Professor Chris French, also gives a regular talk called Weird Science, which is primarily about the psychology of unusual or anomalous experience. The course that you deliver then, Edis, called Weird Science. Taner, tell us a bit more about that.
Well, it's actually on interesting sort of course in that it's not specifically about parapsychology only. Typically, parapsychology is one of our topics that we deal with in the course. It's essentially just about anything that is on the fringes of science, is sort of popularly accepted but rejected by mainstream science, is fair game. And it's largely a course that's driven by what the students are interested in. For example, this semester, I'm teaching the course right now. At the beginning of the semester, I kind of explained to the students what the object of this was all about, and I tried to find out what topics they were interested in. And we voted, and we decided that we were going to do 5 topics throughout the semester. And the 5 topics they chose were conspiracy theories, aliens, alternative medicine, parapsychology, but parapsychology in the context of traditional religious beliefs like miracles. And then finally, we're going to round up the semester by talking about ideas that sound crazy from mainstream science and what actually separates them from the crazy but paranormal ideas. And the way we approach this is I actually don't lecture or anything in class. I make the students do presentations, and I try and provoke them into arguing amongst themselves as much as possible. In fact, my idea of a really successful session in class is an hour and a half where I say very little, and the students talk amongst themselves, argue amongst themselves. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult with your stereotypical polite Midwestern student to get them to disagree with each other, but once I get them doing that, it gets interesting. And the idea of the course is that just like I don't really lecture, I'm not going to tell them this is the way that it is. So that they can be believers, they can be skeptics, they can be anything they want, as long as they actually try and defend their position with a decent sort of argument, particularly when they produce their written papers, which I have to evaluate later, it's okay with me. So actually some of my better students in the course have been people who have tried to defend some paranormal view or creationism or what have you. As long as they do a good writing job, it's fine with me.
Absolutely. It sounds fantastic. I'm completely with you in terms of not lecturing and finding ways to, first of all, even allow the students to be involved in creating the course content and the focus, because, again, it gives them that sense of responsibility of what they would like to look at. So completely with you on that. So in terms of the students on the course, are these, because you say are you based within a physics department? Who are the students typically? Are they from particular one discipline, or are they from different areas that can do the course?
The students, our university has a setup where you can teach things that are called junior interdisciplinary seminars. Junior in the sense that you have to be a third-year student at least to be able to come in, to have that kind of maturity to be able to take this course. Is interdisciplinary. They actually want interdisciplinary topics, and let's face it, the kind of things that skeptics are interested in are very interdisciplinary. And you do it as a sort of a seminar, writing-intensive seminar type of format. And we have lots and lots of these courses across campus, and mine is just one of them. And I teach this even though I'm based in a physics department, because pretty much every department, according to their size, contributes some sort of course according to their abilities or their faculties and interests. And my particular situation is that even though my background is in theoretical physics, For the past decades or dozen years, things like that, actually, I've been more active in the philosophy of science, particularly because of my interest in the questions having to do with pseudoscience and the paranormal and so forth. In fact, I was on sabbatical last year. I spent it in Belgium, and I spent it in a philosophy department, not in a physics department. So I'm sort of the physics department's kind of go-to interdisciplinary guy, and so I get the job of doing this course, and everybody's happy. And also, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, so the students are from what kind of backgrounds they have? Is it just a whole range of subjects? Because again, I think often the US degree system is a little bit different from the UK one, where again, it varies between institution, but students will be signing up for a certain type of degree, and therefore, let's say, many psychology degrees are focused on psychology, but here they're doing maybe a broader range of subjects. You've got different backgrounds from students.
The university I teach at is a public liberal arts university, which is, because of its liberal arts emphasis, it does encourage this sort of interdisciplinary work more so than other places which are more sort of research oriented. And the kind of students I get in my class are really a cross-section of campus. I have in my class a number of people who are science majors. I've got a couple of physicists, biologists, chemists, and things like that. I got a few psychologists. I've got a philosopher, a historian, English majors, one or two business majors, a couple pre-meds, and actually, I may even be overcounting because a lot of them are double majors and things like that. Again, perhaps because of the whole liberal arts culture of the university. So I have students from all sorts of backgrounds, and one of the things about the course is that I can't assume any sort of science background for my students. I mean, they may have had some sort of introductory science course at a very low level at some point in their lives, but the course really isn't about reasoning through things in any sort of technical detail. It's more about negotiating questions that just about anybody, no matter what their background, has to confront when dealing with, say, for example, science as an institution. It's about negotiating issues such as how do you put your trust in various different institutions, people. How do you figure out when you don't have the resources to do investigations yourself or learn all the technical details yourself? How do you actually respond to something like an alien abduction question or a parapsychology question, everything like that, when you can have people with PhD after their names arguing on both sides of an issue, and you really don't have the technical expertise to sort things out? So the students spend most of their time actually, of course, talking about the details of various paranormal claims or the other, but implicitly and in the background, what they're really trying to figure out is how to negotiate these issues of trust. That's really, in some ways, the main theme of the course, not so much the whole paranormal thing. That's more of an excuse.
If I could just ask you just a quick question then, Taner, before we wrap it up. I mean, I left parapsychology, and one of the things I described it as backdoor theism. And I wonder if you have any, if you could give me a response to that?
I would agree with that. I mean, in one of my books, I described parapsychology as a dualist research program. In many ways, that's what it is. It's trying to resurrect some modernized, suitably retooled, more scientifically acceptable version of the supernatural and legitimate it. And if it were successful, it would have accomplished exactly that, I think.
I mean, that's one bit. And go on, Louie. I was going to say,
well, that was my experience was that I felt that the other parapsychologists were basically looking for evidence of the soul, which wasn't what I was doing.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. That's what a dualist research program would do.
Yet at the time, Louie, you would have described yourself as a parapsychologist.
Absolutely, 100%, yeah.
So that's why I'd kind of take some, or challenge that approach, because again, it's interesting because in some ways, Taner may be most involved in some of this by actually teaching a course which, in some ways, is looking at some of the kind of recent research, whereas you and I, Louie, have looked at something most recently now, probably 10 years ago or something, if not more that, and we've kind of moved away from parapsychology. But my interest at the time was more as a curious skeptic, thinking, well, there are some interesting claims there about these ideas, and I wonder if one can do psychological type research that's exploring whether or not those claims seem to stand up. And therefore, as in just this idea of, say, ESP, can people seemingly communicate in a way which we cannot yet normally understand, let's say? I wouldn't necessarily describe what I'm trying to do there is prove it one way or the other. I'm trying to explore this notion of psychic experience, wherever it might be. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I was engaging in what would necessarily be a dualist paradigm. Is that fair to kind of defend at least that approach? That I think some parapsychologists are looking at areas or doing work in the area that aren't necessarily trying to demonstrate that hypothesis.
I mean, that's probably accurate enough. I mean, in the sense that there are people who call themselves theologians who do not do theology in a theistic context. They just happen to be interested in that particular religious tradition and the kind of philosophical arguments that are prompted by it. So as with anything, I mean, I mentioned earlier that physics kind of has fuzzy boundaries, and I'm sure the same thing is true about parapsychology or indeed anything.
Absolutely, and I think also from, again, both at least Louie and my perspective, we are both based in different psychology departments. The PhDs would be, well, actually my PhD wasn't a parapsychology one anyway, but there was some research that was kind of looking at some topics in that area, but broadly, you see oneself as a psychologist, and often I would then justify that approach as saying, well, people have these experiences they describe as either psychic or paranormal or anomalous, and at the very least, as a psychologist, we should be studying them and either taking them on face value and exploring them and looking at different kinds of scientific and other types of explanation to explore what's going on there. So to me, I saw it falling within psychology. And even though the term parapsychology sees it as either being beyond or beside psychology, again, it's one of these areas which, for many years, people were kind of exploring the term, which is why people like Professor Chris French, who's the gentleman we mentioned before, who was, again, delivers this talk on weird science, as becoming one of these people who adopt this idea of anomalistic psychology. People have these experiences, and there are a range of ways we can study them to learn more about why people have the experience, what possible explanations there could be for them, what they mean to people, that kind of thing.
No, that sounds very reasonable to me, but then again, I'm interested. I find it fascinating. I mean, I don't have the background to actually directly do any work in the area, but I do like to sort of follow what's going on. Yeah,
and in fact, you may have a better idea. So, again, to Louie and I know, Louie, you've had a chance to look at any more recently. I don't get a sense of what recent research is happening in parapsychology. I think both of us got to the point, because in fact, probably our last forays into this were work we did together, which was looking at kind of so-called ESP type experiences and using an experimental setup. But I haven't really followed to know what is happening more recently, and I haven't got a sense there's been anybody really demonstrating stuff that's earth-shattering.
Are you not being a bit generous there, Matt? I mean, there's been over 100 years of research in parapsychology, and they haven't achieved anything that anybody would identify as a result that stands up. So I don't think in the last 10 years we can expect that anything else has happened. I mean, am I being unfair there?
I don't know, but I've got a feeling that maybe one of our future guests should be a so-called, let's not say so-called, a parapsychologist, somebody who identifies as a parapsychologist, who can maybe update us to say, well, what is out there, either in the last 10 years, or they may have a different take on the last 100 years and say, well, what has been shown there? What should we really be taking note from? Because like you say, mainstream science, mainstream psychology and so on is not really taking it seriously. It's still very much seen as a fringe endeavour that some people might say a fringe science, some people may describe as pseudoscience. I am sure parapsychologists would say they're doing, in quotes, good science, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of clear findings coming out that would, people could stand by and say, look, psychic phenomena, this is what it looks like, this is how you test it, here's how to explore it, which is one reason why I realised that my time might be spent best doing something a little bit different. And on that note...
Should we say thank you
Does that
for
bring this to an end?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for joining us then, Taner. It was fascinating talking to you.
Yes, thank you, Taner. Sorry for getting your name wrong earlier on.
No big deal. My students pronounce my name in about 500 different ways, so I'm used to it.
And I hope you enjoyed your foray with these weird people that we are.
Oh, yeah, it's fun. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, bye-bye.
Thanks, Taner. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.